I think one of the most important points that you learn in a startup is that you will definitely make mistakes along the way. Go into small companies and startups, you will learn so much faster, like the most important skills from my perspective. You will become quite a generalist in a startup because a lot of times you grow faster than you can hire.
I think leadership is really not about the comfortable things.
No, definitely not. I think you go out of your comfort zone like every day in so many different ways. How do I find my leadership role, but without being too bossy or distancing myself too much from the team?
For me, leadership, it has multiple facets.
To be in your first leadership role is really hard because it's really hard to find this new relationship with the people that are in your team.
A mentor is also someone who takes interest in your career.
But I think like what helps me most is talking with all of these people. I think the first 2-3 months I talk with almost every team and I start to get the feeling of what do they need, where are they in their journey, and how can I help them and their team.
Hello and welcome to our next episode of the Agile Insights Conversation. Today I'm hosting Isabella Thissen, whom I've known for a long time now, who's been a participant in my courses and whose career I could basically follow as an outsider, insider to some extent. And I'm super interested and excited to have her here with us. Isabella, very welcome to the show. How is everything?
Thanks for having me. It's so good to see you again and to speak with you about a lot of topics also, because you said like we worked together for such a long time now, right? So for several jobs that I've been through, actually you always helped me and my teams to go to the next level. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. So.
Oh yeah, you're too kind. You're too kind. I think I played a tiny role. The vast majority was done by yourself. But yeah, as you mentioned, it's been a while. And we scheduled this call, I think, in June of this year. And now it's it's end of November. And in the meantime, we just figured out before we started the conversation, I had written you some questions up front. I had completely forgotten about them. But fortunately, my notes now and the question I sent you back then, they still match. So I think we're set for this conversation.
Otherwise, we improvise.
Absolutely. Now, Isabella, as I always start, I want to give you some space, some time to introduce yourself properly so that the people who don't know you yet get a better sense of who is this person, who am I going to have this conversation with, and then I kick it off with a few other questions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I'll just do a quick overview. If you have any questions, I mean, you will ask them either way. So that's perfect. So Isabella, I'm now, I would say, for about 10 years in product or agile leadership positions. I started off with something completely different. So I studied psychology in the beginning because I always wanted to think about organizations as like a system, and I wanted to study psychology as like clinical psychology. But back then, the grade that you needed to get into University of Cologne was 1.0, which is the best grade that you can get basically. And I was quite far from that. In school, I was not that eager. So there were things that interested me and not. But that's a whole other story. So I studied business psychology with a focus on like diagnostics, assessment center, etc. And I worked a bit in that space, like next to my studies. And I got to know like a super interesting startup or people with idea of a startup. The startup was not founded by then. And it was a startup that had the mission of matching a person with their soft skills to a specific job, right? So not with your hard skills, but because especially when you studied and you studied something very broad, it's really hard to find a job that fits to you, right? And where you can flourish in your role as a person, in the team, etc. So we thought of it as like skills are replaceable, personality is not. That was kind of the claim. And I worked with them with my psychological background on the matching algorithm. How would we think about what matches to what, who matches to which company? And I started in this company when there were 4 founders. So I was the first employee basically. And we grew over the years to 100 people. So in this time, I did like almost anything that you can do in a company, right? So I was doing the matching algorithm. Then I was like, what else can I do? Or maybe we can do investors and pitch investors. Maybe we can go to first customers together. And then oh, the telephone is ringing. Probably the founders should not be the ones to pick up the telephone. So I will do that in the beginning until we hired customer service. So I was growing into a lot of roles and having different roles in the company. But in the end, I was leading the product management and project management department. So I was focusing really on building the product itself, which was really exciting. And then there was a decision for the company to focus more on projects with customers. And I wanted to be a bit more professional in product management. And this is when I got the idea to make a change. And I started at Stepstone, which is an international job board. Probably many of the people will know it. It operates in like a lot of countries, especially in Europe. And I was beginning there like as a lead product owner for like the user experience part and was having projects of having a lot of technical platforms built into one. So this was the time of responsive web design and where you almost all had like mobile websites still. So there was this huge project of getting everything unified into one unified user experience on all the channels. And over the course of the time, I was getting into the head of product role for the B2C product, so for the job seeker side. And I was leading product management people and UX people and SEO people, so a bit broader. And after several years at Stepstone, I worked there for, I think, almost 3 years. There was a change in leadership that didn't really fit well for me. I think it's really important that you fit to your boss, right? And your boss fits to you. So it needs to be a really good collaboration. I think it didn't fit that well for both of us. And then I decided to start to search for something new. And this is when I think now 5 years ago, I landed at RTL Germany, which is like one of the two big broadcasters in Germany. There's RTL and ProSieben and the public sector, right? And I started there as head of product for the news portals. So there were a lot of news portals that were every one of them was one business case, basically. So there is RTL.de, there's Sport.de, there's Wetter.de, which is like a weather site, a cooking site. And they were all just like one business case. And I was really loving the fact that I could manage small business owners and have a team of small business owners to work with, right? And I did this for now, I think, 3 years. And the team was growing from product owners, more product owners, then UX designers, and this was quite interesting. And then at the end, I also took over the responsibility of the revenues, basically, so of the monetization side of things. And last year, I think a lot of people read about the big change at RTL. There was this big integration of Gruner and Jahr, which is another big publisher in Bertelsmann. And in this context, we were a lot of people in a lot of roles double. And this was the point where I said, like, okay, maybe there's something else in the company for me because I love the company. And maybe there's another point in the company where I could also help, right? And this is when I came now 1.5 years ago, roughly, to Agile, which is the sales house of RTL Germany. And now currently I'm in the role of, it's called Chief Operating Officer. So I'm responsible for the day-to-day business, basically, day-to-day business operations at the sales house, which is product management, which is pricing of all our products, which is tech on data, all the tech and data developments that we have, and also client services. So it's a broader range. It's a bit more generalistic role. And that's where I'm currently at. And what I'm always forgetting is I did a master study somewhere in between, and I never know when I started and when it stopped, basically, through all the jobs. And I did a master's in digital business management and entrepreneurship, which was quite a new master when I started. I think we were the first group to have it, actually. And this was super interesting and helped me like really a lot with the digital business models and everything that I worked on.
Yeah.
That's like
cool. So that's been a hell of a journey. And
it has been, yeah.
Yeah, and there's probably way more to come in the future as you're still very, very young. Now, let's start, Isabella, with the time in your startup, because what's interesting for me is what did you learn at each of those stages? You already mentioned some of those things. For example, it's really important to fit with your boss and that your boss fits with you, right? This is one of those learnings. But let's start with your very first job out of university, where you joined that startup and you helped it grow to about 100 people in size. What were some of the key learnings that you made back then, especially looking at it retrospectively, that supported you becoming the leader that you are today?
Yeah. And it's funny that you mention now that you look at it, because I think now I look at it completely different than when I did back then. So this, I think this is one of the biggest learnings, that just in retrospective, you think like, that might be a good learning what I had back then. And it's probably because of this. Now in the startup, I think there were different points that I really learned. I think one of the most important points that you learn in a startup is that you will definitely make mistakes along the way, like a lot of them, because we were all super junior. That's how startups. It was not back then as professional as it is today. Maybe with the hiring, with the big fundings, it's just like you start with a young team, and like a super motivated team, but with a young team that has not a lot of experience, right? And then you start and you are like, okay, there's a new task and I have no idea how to do it. And I probably start to Google it, to go on YouTube, to read a book or something, and then I will try it out. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I need to find another way, because there's not one other person next to me that does the same job as I do, right? So I need to figure it out somehow. And I think this mindset of I need to figure it out, and it's completely okay that I will take some time to figure it out. Not that much time, but like I have a lot of trials, right? So this, I think today it's called like this culture of you can make mistakes, etc. That a lot of companies want to do. I think it's built into a startup, that you make mistakes all the time. You just make them really, really, really fast. And you need to learn from them really, really fast, because you cannot afford to make the mistake like 2-3 times in a row, right? So this was a huge learning in the startup, and you get comfortable with it. And that's quite nice now, to be comfortable with, it didn't work. Okay, what do I do now? So that's really nice. And I think one thing is also that you become quite a generalist in a startup, because a lot of times you grow faster than you can hire. And then somebody needs to take on that job, because there is a customer, you need to do it right now. And then you expand your abilities, right? And you need to, okay, nobody does it. Okay, I will do it. Come, I will look into it. And you become quite a generalist. And I think this helped me to look at problems, not only like from a tech perspective or from a singular perspective, but rather to learn to think in a company view and not into a department view. And this helps you to get into that helicopter perspective, to look at things from above and say like, how does this help the whole company that somebody does that right now and how we do it, and not how does it help me, right? And this is what you also learn in a startup, because it's like a family at that time. Yeah, you're small, you have a lot of challenges together. It's a journey. I mean, you probably know it very well, because you're also a founder. And I think that's the journey. You're a family. There's a lot of struggles, but you kind of learn to think as a whole and as a company, and to learn a lot in that time. So I think these are the two most important things.
It's interesting that you mentioned those two things, because these are also concrete examples that I bring up when I talk to my larger corporate clients about the enablement and the ability of people to learn new things, right? They look at, for example, a developer, and in many cases, it's just a back-end developer. And in some cases, even like a database developer. They're like, okay, this person, that's what he is. And I'm like, no, really not. Because if you are in a startup, right, you cannot say, I am that. There's always new things that are coming at you. And every startup that I've been part of, that I've observed from the outside, similar to what you were just mentioning, people really have that mindset, right? And also then based on that, the ability to go out, try new things, do things that they have never done before. And as part of that, of course, build new skill sets. Are they going to be an expert in marketing and everything? No, of course not. But they will do it in a good enough way so that you can please the customer at that moment. And then if you see that it's going to happen more often, you can think about either having one person specialize in it or hiring someone from the outside that can take it over. But this one thing where people are like really open to constantly try new stuff, and as part of that, learn new stuff and be willing to do mistakes as you go, This is really, really key. I love that about startups. I mean, right now.
I love that as well. There comes a point where you say like, I might love like a bit stability sometimes, like one process, not like I don't want to have all the process, but I want one process that works the same all the time. And maybe I don't know, I also want to professionalize in at least one thing, maybe want to be a bit more professional in certain things. But I think it's a great way to start your career also. I think it's a lot of people start right now really in like the big corporates when they're young. And I'm like, don't do it. Like go into small companies and startups. You will learn so much faster, like the most important skills from my perspective. But that's also what I did. So I'm probably there always.
And so this is one aspect that you mentioned. The other aspect is that things are constantly changing. And you mentioned that you get used to it, right? One of the questions that people ask me a lot, oh yeah, with this whole agility thing, then this means we have to constantly change. And this is going to be very like, really bad for morale. I'm like, no, because you can also get used to change. And then it becomes just very normal. Actually, you would be bored if things are not changing, right? I agree with you. A bit of stability, a bit of predictability is great to have, because otherwise it's just too much stress over a long period of time. But I personally, I would get bored if things stop changing for us. Yeah.
That's actually hard when you join then a corporate later on, because then you have the problem. It's like, it's so slow. I feel like I'm running like with like 100 miles per hour, like against a wall. I'm just like, that's not how it can be. It's that slow, and then you get adapted to speeds, etc. And it's different speeds. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's really hard then to change gears.
Yeah. So let's use that as a segue to, you move from that startup where you had all of these key learnings and get into a company which is still not a corporate, if my understanding is correct, right? Stepstone was not a corporate, but it was already a scale up. It had a proven business model. It was probably much larger in size than what you had back then in your startup. And you become the lead product owner, and soon after you become the head of product. Becoming the head of product is probably your first real like managerial position. How did you get into that role? What were the initial challenges that you faced? And now again, looking at it retrospectively, what were some of the early learnings that you had as a manager?
Yeah. So I actually did manage like some people at the startup. So this was probably my first leadership role was at the startup, because I was also leading basically a team of product managers back then. But then again, looking back retrospectively, I'm like, I probably was one of their buddies and we worked together, and I'm probably on paper, I was their boss, but like I did so many mistakes, and probably I was not really like, it was not really my first leadership position, I would say. I would say it was really at Stepstone. And I think one of the points when I also decided for Stepstone was because of my boss, or my boss to be, basically. So back then, Thorsten was his name. So he was having all the talks with me about joining, about his vision of the company, how he wants to develop it, etc. And he was the reason I joined. Basically, I was like, Stepstone, probably okay, probably nice products, but he was the reason why I joined. And I think he saw something also in our talks where he said like, I want to develop you into the head of role really soon. So actually in our hiring process, he already said like, I'm building a team and I see a big potential in you leading the team, like in a half a year, in a year, let's see where the road takes us, right? And this is why we worked from the beginning on that role, which was really interesting for me, because he really took a lot of time, and I had the big luxury that a lot of people don't have, to have a lot of time to prepare for my first leadership role, my first real leadership role in a corporate. And I was not just jumping into the waters, right? So he was saying, okay, these are the skills that you need. And I think you are there somewhere. And I want to work with you on building your leadership skills. And also he helped me with the transition, with the communication with the team, because I think the hardest thing in your first leadership role is actually not the leadership role. It's that you are the boss of the people that you used to work with. So you, from out of the team to be in your first leadership role, is really hard, because it's really hard to find this new relationship with the people that are in your team? Like, are you now their like super strict boss? Are you still their buddy? Can you be a buddy with them still? How hard are you in the conversations? How democratic do you want to lead with your team? So it changes from one day to another, especially for the people that you lead, and not for yourself so much, but for the people you lead. You are in a different relationship to them. And I think this is really hard in your first leadership role, to find really this balance of how much am I part of the team? How do I find my leadership role, but without being too bossy or distancing myself too much from the team? So that's really hard. That was really, really hard for me, because I love them all, right? It was my team. So for me, it was really hard to suddenly be their boss. I was always imagining it like, great, I'll be in my first leadership position, and then like, oh shit, I'm the boss of my team then. That's strange, right? This was, I think, was the hardest thing in the first leadership role that I had to learn.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I can relate to you being a member of that team, and then you become the boss and it becomes difficult, right? All the questions that you mentioned, and I want to explore them with you. But sometimes, like in my role, being the founder of the company, the managing director, it's very natural that I am the boss of the people. But as I still do a lot of work with them, I also consider myself as part of the team. So the dilemma that you were in, I still have that, despite being like naturally the founder and CEO of my own company. Now, how did you find that balance? And you mentioned the question, like, can you still be their buddy? Like, how would you answer that question today, and how did you answer it for yourself back then?
Yeah. I think the relationship is always a little bit different than like a normal colleagueship. And I think you need to accept that, because there will always be a natural, I don't want to say distance, but I'm missing the right word here. So there will always be a natural, it's still the person who evaluates if I do a good job or not. So there's always this like small barrier of, in the end, it's still my boss. Of course, you can have like a good relationship with them. You can still go out for drinks with them. That's not a problem. But I think you really need to reflect yourselves on who are my favorites in the team. And I cannot play favorites as a boss. So this is something that you need to reflect on. How is what's the expectation of me in my role now from them? Also, and I think this helped me a lot. I talked with all of them about the transition, first with my boss. So we did the first talk together, and then I also had like my one-to-ones with the full team. And I think what really helped me is that I asked them, what actually do you expect of this new relationship between us, right? So how do you want to play it? How does it feel right for you? How we dive into that. And there were people that said like, oh, for me, that's completely fine. I mean, you were the lead product owner before when it comes to strategic, etc. So that doesn't change for me. And in the end, there were also people that said like, okay, that's strange because I wanted the job and now you have it. And that's strange for me, no, right? So strange situation to be in. And funnily enough, the people who were the most critical in the beginning were in the end the best working relationships actually between me and them. Because I think the people who said like, oh, it's fine, that's completely good, they didn't expect a change, or that I will be hard on them, that I would set goals, that I would criticize them, that I would get feedback back to them, and that things would change. And actually for them, it was later on that they said like, oh, give me a moment, that's different, and I didn't expect that, and I'm not sure if I like it, right? So this was quite interesting. But the talks helped me with the expectations, to really ask about the expectations. And then also like we had a coaching company with us, and it was called commitment-based management. And that's like a super specific coaching. And it was going into what's your responsibility as a product owner, as a head of, as a leadership person. So what's your responsibility in this company? And people tend in agile environments to be like, we are all responsible and it's democratic, and we decide together, and we can try it out, and there's no wrong, etc. So people tend to actually go out of their responsibility when it comes to sometimes agile work environments, and they were holding us accountable for, no, that's your job now. And being product owner is great because you have the freedom to decide, but you also have to decide, and you will be measured by your decisions. And if the decisions don't work, it's not your boss who kind of you talk to, because you are the product owner. We talk with you then, right? And they also did that with us in the leadership positions, and that was really helpful to get into this commitment-based mindset to say, like, okay, what's my commitment to my team as a leader? So how do I want to fill the role? And I think then you also get to know, like, sometimes a no is better for them. Sometimes being hard in that moment is better for them, but it's harder for me. But I need to learn that because they need that, right? So this is where you get into the mindset of what's my responsibility, even if it's uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, and I think leadership is really not about the comfortable things.
No, definitely not. I think you go out of your comfort zone like every day in so many different ways. Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, it is then ultimately, and you mentioned like this agile communities and all of that, right? I think one of the underestimations that they do is the importance of a leader in terms of making the bad calls, right?
Yeah.
Addressing the tough situations. And because it's not always rainbow and sunshine and all of that, there are tough situations. There are tough decisions to be made. And when I look at most teams, both within my own company, but also outside, if you give them a tough decision to make, they usually don't make it. They're then stuck in analysis paralysis. And this is the point where if you want to move forward as an organization, you really need that person who takes the lead. That's why it's called leadership, right? From time to time, you lead from the front and you address those tough situations. Now, what I want to dive into is you had these conversations with people, right, early on. And I think this is really important because then you can also not only align on expectations, you can actually come to agreements. One of the tools that I have found helpful throughout my career is called Manager on a Page, where I share with people what is my preference. And it's not like eat or die, as we would say in German, right? But it's more like, hey, this is how I work best. Now let's see how that resonates with you and how we can come to an agreement so that both I get what I need in order to do my best job, but also you get what you need in order to do your best job. And the more we make this transparent, similar to teams setting up working agreements, I think the more we will benefit from it in the long run. And probably you did something similar. The other point that crossed my mind when you were talking is you mentioned the people where it was initially the most difficult conversation, the biggest skeptics. It turned out to be the best relationships. I think this is because they didn't underestimate the change. Right?
Yeah.
When you underestimate the change, it's going to hit you even harder in the future. So you're like, oh, it's all going to be good. We're still friends and all of that. And then you have to make a tough call and they feel offended, right?
Yes.
But if you address those things early on, and yes, we cannot address everything given it's your first leadership position, all of that, but as much as we can and be conscious of the change happening in that relationship, I think that's going to make a huge difference for anybody who steps similar to you into their first leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it changes over time. I think always in your first leadership position, you're a bit too soft on issues. maybe I overgeneralize, but I think if you are in your first leadership position, you're so much into the how do we do it, how do we make it work, and you're still really in the team, right? So in head of a team lead position, and I think you're a lot of times you're too soft on issues, right? You're not hard enough. I think you learn that over time. How to integrate that.
I agree with you in general. I have seen a few people that in their first leadership role they're too hard.
Okay.
And out of fear of being too soft, right?
Okay.
And I think, and this is a hypothesis, right? By no means it's proven, but I think it's due to, I mean, you remember the personality types that we talked about in our Agile Leadership course, like assertive and accommodative. I think depending on where you position yourself, you might turn out to be the other one too much. So I would guess that are more on the assertive end. So when we go into our first leadership role, we try to not be too assertive, turn out to be too accommodative. And some people are the other way around. But this is, again, a hypothesis, which probably needs to be proven.
Gives me something to think about. Yeah. Definitely.
So now you are in your first leadership role, and you set it out, you do your initial conversations with people. Being the head of product at now Stepstone, you're not only responsible, if I remember correctly from your introduction, for the product owners, which is a role that you are familiar with, where you have also a deep expertise yourself, but you're also responsible for the UX people, for the SEO people, and probably a few others. How does leading those people differ from leading the ones that you are very familiar with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. I think, and maybe that's controversial, I think it's easier to lead them and it's easier to dive into that. And I'll tell you why, because if you're a product owner yourself or a product manager yourself and you get into the head of product position, you're one of these nasty expert leaders that say, like, I did your job actually, and I did it quite well. That's now a bit overemphasized, but you know what I mean? You did the job, right? And you see it and you're like, why does he do it that way? Or why does she do it that process? Why did she did that decision? How does she talk with the team? So I think you are easier to judge because you did the same job. And it's hard to step back and say, like, it's okay that people do it differently than I did it. And I need to have a different mindset or a different scale. There was actually a bird on our window. Wow. That was scary. And I think that's harder to pull yourself back into the leadership role, and you're still more in the expert role. You are not in the leadership role, not that fast. And with people who you never did the job, I was never really a UX designer. I did some UX designs in Keynote, right? So that it was not UX design that was like circles and boxes, etc. But I was never UX designer. I never did SEO. And for me, it was really easier to get with them into I cannot do your job. You're the expert. How can I support you? How can I support you? Is it with goals? Is it with discussions? Is it with, and even when they came to me and said, like, I have a problem, it's like, I don't understand your problem. So you have to give me options that you thought about, and then we can discuss the options. So you're easier from my perspective in the leadership conversations, in the leadership role, because you cannot do the job by yourself. Yeah. So, and this is why it was easier for me. For that, with them, I was faster actually in my leadership role than with the product owners. There, I was more like the lead product owner still, right? I was like, should we not do this strategic decision or this prioritization? That was harder to pull back. So it helped me, I think, in the first
now, you mentioned this could be controversial. Now let's discuss it. No, I fully agree. I've been in the same situation for many years. The core of my company's work, I'm a deep expert in, and I still deliver a lot of the things, right? Be it training services or coaching. But for example, with my 2 engineers that we have on staff, or the designers that we have on staff, I mean, with the design, you could still argue, right? It could be like
everybody has an opinion on design. Designers love that. Yeah, exactly, definitely.
Right? But with the engineers, I literally have no clue what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And yes, it changes the way I lead them compared to the way I would lead someone that goes into co-training with me or does something in terms of sales. But I think it also depends on how we define leadership. And for me, leadership, it has multiple facets. One is what you just mentioned in your conversations with the SEO people. Hey, right, I don't understand what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And now I engage with you as a sparring partner. You bring up ideas and you lead them through a different way. Another facet of leadership for me, and I mean, the people that watch this show, they know I have a medical background, is how we are trained in hospitals by more senior doctors. And of course, you can only do that, right? The development of people, enabling them to do their job well, if you have a certain amount of expertise in that space. I fully agree with you. If you initially move from being the lead product owner into the head of product, you probably tend to be too much of an expert leader, right? But I think this can also be so beneficial because probably the SEO people didn't learn that much from you as the product owners could learn from you in terms of the craft, right? Not in
The
terms
craft,
of
right.
in terms
I
of
would agree on the craft. True, true. But I think it also depends on how mature are the people that you lead, right? Because I think if you're a head of a department, it's super important if you have a junior team that you have somebody who actually knows how to do the job in a leadership. That's what you said, right? So you can be a role model, you can help them through problems because you did the job, because you have the skill set, right? And once you lead a bit more mature team and they know how to do their job, I think they still learn something from you because most of them are experts in their field and they need to get to the point where they are a bit more themselves, like also lateral leaderships. So they are more senior, they lead projects, and then they get into the roles of, oh, I need to do all the decisions and I cannot be that democratic and I'm not just a sparringspartner. So they get into, I think they learn other things from you. And I think it really depends on, especially in head of positions. I think later on it's not that important anymore. But I think in this first leadership level, you need to really select the leader based on the maturity of the team, right? So what's their background and what does he or she bring to the team? And I think that's really important. I had a really mature team. That was my benefit. Like in all the positions that I led, they were quite mature. They're which is different difficulties to be honest, but still, I think I didn't have to train a UX designer because there were senior UX designers. If there was a junior joining, they would develop them with the craftsmanship. And I would rather lead with goals and with different things, right? So I think it really depends on how mature your team is.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned it yourself. If a junior would have joined, you had more senior UX designers who could support that person. And I think this is another thing that at least I learned on my leadership journey is I don't have to be the enabler, the trainer of everyone, right? And I mean, I don't have to be it alone all by myself. So I can bring in others who can support doing that part of the job where I'm probably not as good at, right? And it could be other people within my company. It could be people from outside of the company. So, for example, I asked my two engineers that they find mentors in their field of work outside of the company because we're not a big company. So there is no one who could be their mentor in terms of craftsmanship. And they've gone on and have tried and done that, and it has helped them, right? But bringing up these ideas, I think, and giving them the permission to do so, I think that's the important piece. So you don't have to do all of those things alone.
But it's difficult, I think, when you're in a leadership position in your first, like to actually give into the idea that you cannot be all for everybody, right? That you don't have to do it all by yourself because the conception of you is, oh no, I have to do it now all by myself. The whole pressure is on me. And I cannot give it to other people because it's my job, right? To train the people and to mentor them. But I found like your mentor, if you're really lucky, it's your boss or your direct leader. But probably most of the times not. Probably most of the times you find mentors like in different lines to you. So I think that's that was at Stepstone. I was really lucky that it was my boss, but I think most of the times I think it's more powerful to find a mentor that's not your direct leader.
Yeah, and you can have multiple mentors, right? Now,
Yeah.
let's go into this because I wanted to talk about the role of mentorship anyway. And as you mentioned, you joined Stepstone specifically for that one leader because you believe that that could be someone that helps you go to take it to the next level, which you also did with your role. Now, what kind of role have mentors played as part of your career? And you can start with that person. I don't remember his name, but yeah, Thorsten, I think, right? And then also probably with others.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really hard to define which one of them was a mentor and which was just a person that I learned something from. I think it's really, you have to be open for the latter. I think that's really, really, really important to learn because I think you learn most of the conversations or like the interactions with like everybody in the company because you see and say, I like that he did right now or what she did right now. And I want to do the same or be able to do the same. And there's another person who said like, that's something that I don't want to do at all. I don't want to be that way, right? And then you kind of find your distance to that and say, like, how can I work on never doing it that way? And I think you learn a lot from that. But and this is why it's hard to find, like, okay, who are the people that I learn from the most and who are my mentors? It's not always the same people. But I think like there are like 1-2 mentors. Like in my career, it was definitely Thorsten that helped me get into professional product management, because he was like super professional in leading product teams. And I think I learned a lot from him when it comes to leading product teams, like the whole methods that you have to have, like OKRs. I learned OKRs back then from him. So how to set goals, how to work in Scrum, how to make decisions, prioritize, etc. So all the things that you just said, like you can only learn from somebody who did the job by themselves, right?
Craftsmanship.
So I learned like a lot from him, like with the craftsmanship of product management, really. And then there was also like a mentor in my life, which was a woman that helped me. And it was not even like in my company, but she helped me with the struggles of, I sit in a round and there are only men. And it's not that I feel like they don't respect me or that they think like, what is she doing here? A lot of people tend to report these things, right? Like they don't feel comfortable. It's like, no, I'm comfortable there, but I think so differently than them. I act so differently, I lead so different that I always feel alien in these rounds. And like, I cannot join the conversation because they look at me when I say something like, I don't understand what you're talking about, you know? So this was really hard for me. And I had like a woman that was helping me through these conversations, right? And how to address that and how to work through that. And she was not part of Stepstone. She was a coach, like an external coach that helped me quite a lot. So this also helped me. It was kind of a mentor coachship. And I think then there are also people who you can learn something from, but I think the most part of the relationship is sponsors in an organization. I think this role is really underrated, to find a sponsor in a company, because there are people that don't do your job. They do something completely different. And that happened to me at RTL. That was Matthias. So we got to know each other, and I am at a completely different occasion. He does sales and I do product. I think it doesn't get any more far than that. Like from the craftsmanship, it's completely a different craftsmanship, to say at least. But I think he said, like, I like your leadership style. It's completely different than mine, but I like your leadership style and how you develop your people, how you work with your team, and how you think and how you do your job, right? I think you might be a strong manager, like a really, really strong manager, and I believe in you. And I will find opportunities for you, and I will talk about you, and I will, if there's something, I will think about you to fill that position, right? And I think that's really underrated, because it's not that I also learned something from that relationship because he had other skills, but it was rather about there is somebody who sees the way you do it. It's completely different than he or she does it, but he believes that this is helpful for the company, and starts to find opportunities and to mention your name when you're not in the room. And you need people, especially in big corporates, that mention your name when you're not in the room, because that's how you progress in your career. That's basically almost the only way, I think.
It's really nice how you broke that down, right? Because initially, when I started this conversation with the topic of mentorship, I was like, okay, she's going to talk about people that she has learned from, right? But then you're like, no, there are people that you learn from, right? How you want to do things and how you not want to do things. You don't have any formal or informal mentor-mentee relationship with them. It's just you observe and you decide. And in order to be able to observe, you need to be there constantly with an open mind. And those people don't have to necessarily be hierarchically in a higher position than you, right? You can be in any meeting and you can learn something based on the observations that you do. And I think this was a very powerful statement that you brought up. The other piece was the mentors that you had as part of the different jobs that you've done. And at least my interpretation is, you mentioned the term mentorship specifically with regards to certain crafts. The craft of product management that you learned from Thorsten, the craft of like being the alien in the room, in your case, the woman, but still not feeling alien and being able to navigate through that challenge. And I wanted to explore the topic of being a female leader a bit later in our conversation anyway, right? So you learned that from another woman who probably had similar experiences in her life or had supported many other people. But then you brought up the topic of a sponsor. And for me, when I would be asked about mentorship, I would say a mentor is also someone who takes interest in your career. But you make that distinction. For you, the sponsor is the person who has an interest in your career for the benefit not only of you, but also for the benefit of the organization. And you brought up Matthias as an example, which I find is incredibly important, that you, through the interactions that you have, you build promoters, you build sponsors of yourself. Because having people mention your name as you put it out there when you're not in the room, that's really important. And that's both important internally, but I mean, all the referrals that we get are basically people mentioning our name when we're not in the room. And I can say the conversations when you are referred are completely different than when you are out there making a pitch and all of that. So I fully agree with what you've said so far. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So now, as we did this segue to the topic of mentorship, let's go back. You leave Stepstone because of leadership change, etc. You mentioned this in your introduction. And at RTL, you immediately start in that head of product role, but in that case, not soon, in that case, the role is a bit different because you're working now with smaller business owners or owners of like individual products that are like individual businesses. And at some point, after several years, you get promoted, I think we can use that term here, to being the COO at Agile Alliance. Which is now my understanding, you still lead product managers, or product management is still within your domain, but there are a ton of other areas in your domain. And suddenly your leadership space or the number of people that you manage is also significantly higher. Now, what were the challenges that you initially experienced a year and a half ago, almost, when you started in that role?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenges are that you, how do I phrase that? I think it's really not the challenge about, because back then it was, I think when I was head of product, I had the luxury to build my own team because I was the first person there, and they said like, hire your team. And I think that's luxury because you can find people that you are able to work with great. And I had a team of 35 people in the end when I left like 1.5 years ago, my role. And back then I was, I think it was called Senior Vice President Product and Innovation. So that was already a step that I did in that role, right? So it was easier to do the second step for me than now in Agile Alliance. But I think what I haven't had before was I didn't lead leaders that led leaders. And I probably have to dive a bit more into that, because like before I was leading product owners, product leads, experts, and then in the role of head of product at RTL, I also started to lead head offs. So there were then first time leaders that I could help into the role because they were also first time head offs. I just had the experience like some years ago, so I could help them with the craftsmanship of being like a head off, first time head off, right? A first time leader. And that was really interesting. And then the step for me was like from leading just leaders. Then at Agile Alliance, I think it's not the amount of people that really changed it for me. It's now roughly 250 people in my whole department. It's rather, I have 3 levels of leaders between me and experts. Right. So this is one of the biggest things that changed for me. And the biggest challenge was really, how do I become an effective leader when I work with 3 levels until there are people who do the expert decisions, who actually build our products, who actually bring the company forward, right? So how do I work with 3 levels of leadership? And I think this is really hard because like this is a bit like in German you say stille Post. I'm actually not sure how it's called in English. I was just thinking about it. Maybe you know it.
Post.
silent post. That's like this children's game when you tell like a sentence to the other person and the next person, and at the end there's something completely different, right?
Yes.
And I think with having 3 layers of leadership between you and the managers, like the expert managers in the company, it's really hard because everybody filters what you say through their lens, how they see leadership, how they understand what you just said, right? And it gets developed and delivered like through all these decisions. And then you have to decide, when do I want to be the sender to everybody? Because everybody needs to hear it from me and understand how I mean it. When do I when do I use and take one of these leadership levels to work with me? And when do I work with my direct reports? Because in like this normal mindset of a hierarchical company, you think like you only work with your directs. You don't work with everybody else, right? You just work like with your next level. This level works with their next level, etc. So it's like a cascade. And this doesn't work at all. From my perspective, it doesn't work at all. So you need to understand what's the role of every leadership level and what's their job, right? So the direct reports of me, they are like mostly strategic. They do the strategic projects. They lead leaders. They build organization parts. They need to build teams that work, right? Like, and leadership teams that work with them. And they are like the most strategic people in the company. It's called general directors in our terms, right? Then you have directors, and they are more like into one topic. They're not into one full area. They have one topic that they lead, but also strategically, right? And then you have head offs, and they lead the teams that do basically the work that makes us all survive in a company, right? They are the people who are the backbone of our company, and I think it's every leadership level has different tasks and different skills, and depending on what they do, I think about, to whom do I talk, right? And in which rounds do I do, and which meetings do I want to do? Because like if you're such a big organization, if you let it happen, you just have a calendar of 8 to 6. You're just in meetings, and most of them are meaningless. You sit there and you just sit there because you're the boss, and they talk to you, and you're just like nodding and say like, "Ah, makes sense." And this doesn't help the company at all, right? So, and to find out how can you help the company throughout all these levels through this complex organization, I think that's a big step in the mind to how do I work with that? Because it extrapolated so quickly, right? From like 1 level to 3 levels, right? And how do you work with that?
Yeah, I think what you just laid out, it requires a lot of clarity to really understand, right? Where do I provide value?
Yeah.
Value in a way that only I can provide, and not only thinking about this as the COO, but having everyone in a leadership position think that way, right? Because if it's only you, okay, you don't have that full calendar, but all of your general directors have that
full calendar, right? Yeah.
So, and this requires that clarity, I think, requires a lot of self-awareness, right? Requires in general a lot of awareness about how an organization is run effectively. And I think very few people, if not zero, are born with that level of awareness. So that level of awareness is developed. What helped you as you go through your career increase your level of awareness of how the organization runs or should run, and what kind of vital role you can play in that?
Yeah. I think you learn that really, really the hard way, because in the beginning, and we talked about that, when you are head of, you think like, I do all the starting of initiatives, and it's my job to kind of push the organization or pull the organization into the direction that it needs to go, right? And I think we talked about, you start like as an expert. Then you go more into this pulling role of, I pull you all in the direction that I think is the correct one. And I was also going through that stage. That happens, I think, naturally, that you think like, okay, now I have goals and now I need to pull, because otherwise they would not run. But they are the experts. I give them that. So, and I think you need to run through that stages. And then normally you come to a stage where you think like, and I was that at RTL Interactive. So the role before, I was more like this coaching leader, right? To say like, I'm just here as an enablement. And I think I really fell into the trap of, I'm just here if you need me. Otherwise, you are empowered. You can make all the decisions. You can lead yourself, basically, right? And I think that's really a trap of these servant leadership models, of this misunderstood agile principles, right? Because as a leader, you still have a job to do. And I reminded then my training back at Stepstone when somebody said like, you have a job to play as a leader. You cannot be like, it's not my role anymore, right? So, and I think what now helps me is to integrate all of these things and think like, what does the organization right now need and who does need what, right? And for me, it was like, with my general director, sometimes I'm an expert leader where I say like, I also had a full calendar, and that's not how you can manage healthily, like for a long time. You need to find space to think, because your job is mostly strategic and you need sometimes 2 hours in your calendar where you just think. And people have like this inherent fear of, if somebody sees that in my calendar there's a gap of 2 hours, they think I don't work. I don't work, And that's like a corporate thing, that people look at a calendar and think like, you're busy, you must be good. And I think it's the opposite, right? And there I'm more into the expert leader role, where I say like, I did this job and I worked like that and it doesn't work. Please make your calendar free. And these are the tools that help me. It's like super expert, right? And sometimes I'm more like in a coaching situation with younger colleagues, etc. Then there are some mentees in the organization that I have nothing to do with me, right? So they are just people in the organization that see one skill in me. It's the other way around, right? And say like, I want to be able to do that, right? Like being the only female, like in a super male organization or something like that. But I think like what helps me most is talking with all of these people. I think the first 2-3 months, I talked with almost every team and definitely every leader in my organization, right? And I start to get the feeling of, what do they need? Where are they in their journey? And how can I help them and their team? And sometimes it's as simple as I get into a team meeting and I talk about what actually is on our mind right now as the managing board, right? Sometimes it's just listening to the problems and think like, I can help you with that, but with that, I cannot help you, but you as a team could do that, right? So, and sometimes it's like a set an all hands where I talk about the strategy. So with all of these conversations, you get the feeling of, where can I have impact right now? Mm-hmm. And it changes. And this is something that I think is really stressful in the beginning. This changes every day. There will be, yesterday I thought this was the priority, this is what the organization needs, this is what these teams need. There comes one new development, like from external, from internal, two people who don't get along, they just had a fight, and like my whole priorities need to change. My whole calendar needs to adapt, and I still need to be able to do my job, right? And this is something you learn, is this, you need to be so adaptable to other needs. You're not really self-driven anymore. You cannot decide your own calendar anymore, like completely. You have to be there if there's something people need. And you only can do that if you have your tasks somehow aligned in a way that you can do it and still have time left, right? That you can play with, right? And this was like a huge step for me to be able to manage that complex organization, is to have space, have time for conversations, because conversations help like these great organizations a lot. And you underestimate that because you think like, oh, there's a cascade of communication, it should work. There is a strategy, look at it, then you can do it probably, right? But it's the individual conversations with a lot of people. They see something that I don't see. And that's so valuable to have their perspective on topics, teams that work together. And I think this helped me the most, to have these conversations and time for these conversations.
Yeah, I think the aspect of time is really important, as you were speaking, right? In a lot of organizations, I mean, sometimes we ourselves, we look at our calendar like, oh, I can squeeze in another meeting in there, right? Instead of saying, no.
15 minutes, no problem to talk about the strategy of this client, like 15 minutes, put it in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? Well, instead of like, hey, let's block that out. If you want to see your calendar full, okay, block it out, put in there thinking time. And maybe you want to even add, what do you want to think about, right? What is it that I want?
think that's important actually, because if you just have blockers in your calendar, you're so easy to go over them, right? I always write down in this part, I want to think about that or do that or finish that. That's so important for me.
Yeah.
And I think another thing is like to have 1 hour in every day to just get shit done, because like you, and not go over that, right? I have like a GSD blocker in my calendar, and people ask me always, what's GSD? It's like get shit done. I still have administrative tasks as a leader that I need to do throughout the day. And my days get crazy and they change, but I need this hour to be able to not do it in the evenings, to not do it at the weekends, because I think that's my personal value. I don't want to work on weekends, and I don't want to work in the evenings, like have to work. I want to think about work. I will not cut it off, right? But I want to be creative. I want to be more in the mindset of just being able to think. But I don't want to do like 1 hour of just Excel like at the weekend, because I need the energy in the week, like for being able to focus, be there when I'm there, right?
And I mean, you mentioned earlier how important it is to set up things in a sustainable manner, right?
Yeah.
And as a leader, you're also a role model. If they see you working every evening, every weekend, they believe that this is the expectation that you have from all of them as well. And being really conscious about that, I think is really important. Now, one thing is having that time to think. But I think in terms of like raising your level of awareness about certain topics, it's also having time to reflect. And what I do on a regular basis, I block out time for myself. Think, okay, I want to reflect on, right? How did I handle that situation? Or after a meeting, after a conversation like this one, sit down, immediately note down like what went well, what didn't went well. And all of these multi-reflection sessions, they help me tremendously to increase my level of awareness, and by that become better and better and better over time. Now, being conscious of our time, Isabella, I have a final topic, maybe two, that I want to address with you. You already mentioned being the only woman in a group of men. You feel like an alien, right? They don't understand what you're saying. You probably understand really well what they're saying because you're used to the language.
You know?
as you go, you're like, okay, I understand you. You don't understand me. So what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced? Because you mentioned that some of those things that a lot of other women bring up were not the things that were part of the challenges that you faced. Doesn't mean that they are wrong, right? Everybody experiences challenges in a different way. But I want to specifically focus on you as you are today on the show.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. So I think what a lot of time gets mentioned is that women come into, I think today it's a bit different because there are a lot more women like in product management roles and tech roles, etc. I think it developed over the years, but like 10 years ago, I had the feeling that there were not that many, right? So, but I never had the feeling that I was coming to a round and there were only white males, then also, to be honest, right? Because it was then also like a lack of diversity in both dimensions, right? So there was like a group of people who were so similar in their backgrounds and how they think and how they were raised probably and how they managed throughout all the years. I never had the feeling that they saw me coming into the door and said like, oh, maybe you bring me the coffee, like these memes that you always see on the internet. Like I never had the situation that somebody thought like, what's she doing here? Or probably she should not be here, or questioning my capabilities, etc. It was never that. It was rather that these people talked with each other and they understood each other in a language that I didn't speak, that I didn't understood, right? So they were just saying one or two words to the other person, and I was sitting there as like, I don't get what you're saying. The other person nodding, and I'm just like, I just don't get what you're saying. And I was the one asking, what do you mean? Can you please elaborate? Can you please explain that and your viewpoint? And then people looked and was like, why doesn't she get it? We all don't understand why you don't get it, right? Or you have to be harder with your teams. They need a bit more stealth, you know. And I think you get a lot of comments, etc., based from a mindset how they evaluate if you're a good leader, if you're a good manager, if you understand the topic right. And for me, this was really mostly the issue. And I think it changed a bit when I came to Stepstone, because there were two parts of Stepstone, right? There was this German part of the organization, and this was quite similar. Everybody was quite similar. A lot of males, a lot of people from consulting companies, also very similar background. And they had a really similar way how to work. And there was this international part of the developers that I worked with that were spread throughout Europe, like in Poland and in the UK, in Belgium, etc. And I think in this group, I felt the way that nobody understood anybody, right? So it depended sometimes on the English. There was also sometimes the problem that somebody didn't speak English that well, right? So you had to ask. But I think it was also like everybody had a different background. Everybody had a different country that they came from. Everybody had a different education. And you had to listen to somebody and you had to ask the questions. And everybody felt it natural that somebody asked the questions, because half of them also didn't get it, right? So it was natural that everybody was different. And I think this is the power of the diverse teams that sometimes gets forgotten. It's not that everybody has a representation and you have the feeling that you can make it, etc. It's rather the feeling of it's okay to ask questions, and we don't understand each other, but we talk about it, and then we understand each other, and then something great can come from it, right? And in the other rounds, where I was the only female and only men in white and blue shirts, and literally, I'm not joking, really, I was the only one wearing another color than that already. So for me, it was really about feeling that people didn't want to get into my mind and understand how I think. And I had to push that on them. And I didn't feel comfortable I want to be the one pushing my opinion all the time and another standpoint the whole time. I wish somebody else did that. But I'm the only one who thinks different, so I have to do it the whole time. And it's exhausting to be the only one having a different standpoint the whole time, right? Yeah. And I think this is what drained my energy the most when I was the only female or the only other thinking person in the room. Yeah. And mostly in tech, it's the only female, oftentimes, right? But sometimes it's also you're probably the only person with a different cultural background in a group of people. Then you also think a bit differently, right? So, and I think that's what's hard for me, and it was what's most hard for me, and not the female thing. Now, actually, I benefit from being the only female in the ed tech industry, or one of the few females. There are a lot, but I think there are really few on this level, on a company leading level. And we are right now two from the big two broadcasters. There is one female from both broadcasters, and we get invited to every panel because they need to fill the quota, right? And I think somebody else would be better there because they are better in the topic, but still I get asked because I'm the only female in the area, right? And this is where it turned around. So I think it has difficulties in both directions, right? Yeah. I think we really work on mixing different opinions and backgrounds, and female and male sometimes have really a different background, but we need to start there. It just doesn't need to stop there.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I could talk to you for hours, as we've done in the past, but being conscious of our time, of your time, and also the length of this episode, I would make it cut here. Isabella, it was really interesting. I think there were a lot of nuggets of advice, and I specifically say nuggets because I believe they're like golden nuggets for advice for people that are just starting out in a leadership position or have been in a leadership position and want to take that next step, both men and women. I think there's something for anyone in there. And I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy calendar. This was probably one of those blockers, like from 6 months in there, don't move that one. Hopefully we can make it. We both turned out to be healthy today after not feeling that well over the past few weeks. But again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the talk, Sohrab. It was really inspiring always to think about the ideas together and find new ideas out of that. So thank you so much for that.